When Tyler Jenkins found his boat lines deliberately slashed, it wasn't just sabotage, it was a message from the HOA patrol. Behind it all stood Mike Granger, a retired cop who ruled the neighborhood with fines and fear. But Tyler knew the rules better than they did, and anchored his revenge right where it would hurt the most. And just wait until you see how that single act exposed years of abuse and turned the tide for an entire community. Tyler Jenkins wasn't looking for trouble. He wasn't flashy. He didn't make noise. After being laid off from his job as a welder at the shipyard, all he wanted was a little peace, something to hold on to while he figured out what was next. That something was Libby, his 20-foot fishing boat named after his late sister. She was nothing fancy, just fiberglass and weathered wood, but to Tyler, she was freedom. He kept her moored in the quiet marina behind his modest Florida home, tucked between manicured lawns and HOA-mandated stucco townhouses. Every morning he'd drink his coffee out on the deck, watching the light shimmer across the canal. It wasn't a mansion or a yacht, but it was his calm in the chaos. Until the morning he stepped onto the dock and felt his stomach drop. Libby was gone. Well, not gone exactly. She was drifting, gently spinning in slow circles in the open water. Tyler ran down the dock, eyes scanning for damage. It wasn't hard to spot. The mooring lines had been severed. Clean, intentional cuts. Not a fray, not a snap, a knife. 2 of them, one from the bow, one from the stern. He knelt down, touching the ends of the rope. Still stiff, still freshly sliced. That was no accident. For a few seconds, Tyler just stood there, gripping the dock post, the Florida humidity pressing in on his chest. Anger didn't come all at once. It crawled up his spine like a slow fire. He reeled the boat in with the help of a neighbor's paddleboard, silence hanging thick in the air. By the time he had Libby tied off again, the whispers had already started. Bet it was the HOA. Mike's been grumbling about that boat for weeks. Doesn't meet code or something. Everyone knew Mike Granger, the so-called compliance officer for the Homeowners Association. A retired cop who now spent his days patrolling the neighborhood on his golf cart, sunglasses low, clipboard in hand. He had a reputation for going after minor violations with the energy of a man chasing down felonies. Tyler's boat had been on Mike's radar for months. It didn't match the visual harmony of the waterfront properties, he said. It made the place look like a rundown dockyard, he said. And now, coincidentally, Libby had nearly floated off into open water. Tyler didn't need a confession. He didn't need a camera. He just needed one long look at the sliced lines and the smug silence from the HOA office down the block. That was all the confirmation he needed. They thought he'd back down. They thought a little scare would be enough. But that morning, as Tyler sat on the edge of the dock, staring at the soft ripples rocking his stolen peace, something settled hard inside his chest. This wasn't just about a boat anymore. It was personal. Tyler didn't storm into the HOA office that afternoon. He walked in quietly, shoulders squared, holding one of the severed dock lines in his hand like a piece of evidence. The room was cool, overly neat, polished tile floors, a faint citrus cleaner scent, and the quiet hum of a printer spitting out rule violation notices. Behind the front desk sat the familiar faces of the board, retirees with time on their hands and control issues wrapped in business casual polos. At the center, leaning back like he owned the place, sat Mike Granger. Tyler placed the frayed rope on the table. "This was cut," he said, his voice low but steady. "Somebody did it on purpose, and you know it." Mike didn't even glance down. He smiled. Thin, slow, practiced. "Maybe your boat just got loose," he replied. "Things wear out." "It was sliced," Tyler said. "Clean, straight through. You think I don't know what cut rope looks like? I welded in the Gulf for 15 years. There was a pause. Then Mike leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, like he was about to deliver a private favor rather than an insult. "Maybe it's time you stored that thing off-site," he said, "for everyone's peace of mind. This community has standards." A couple of board members murmured their agreement, nodding like bobbleheads. Tyler looked at them one by one, hoping to find even a flicker of hesitation. All he saw were blank stares and polite smiles. They weren't interested in the truth. They wanted him gone, or at least quiet. The message was clear: back down or be squeezed out. He tried the sheriff's office next, took the cut lines, photos, even timestamps from his dock camera. The deputy was polite but unmoved. "It's a civil matter, sir," he said, gently sliding the evidence back across the counter. "You'd have to take it up with the HOA. Back where he started, Tyler's neighbors weren't much help either. A few looked uncomfortable when he asked questions. Most looked away. One woman whispered that Mike's brother worked at the county zoning office and had friends in permitting. "You don't want to make things worse," she warned. "They can fine you for anything." And they did. Over the next week, Tyler received citations for overgrown grass, for parking his truck an inch past the curb, for leaving a non-aesthetic fishing net in view. Each fine was small, but they piled up like paper cuts. Death by paperwork. The emotional toll ran deeper. Libby had been his escape, his last link to a life that made sense. When he lost his job, he'd lost more than income. He lost identity, routine, pride. The boat gave him something to fix, to maintain, to believe in. And now, even that was under siege by people who saw it as an eyesore instead of a lifeline. Tyler didn't shout. He didn't break things. But the silence inside him grew heavy, like an anchor dropping fast through water. They thought he was just another rule follower, just another man with bills and a bent back, and no fight left in him. They were wrong, because when someone's already lost everything that matters, you can't scare him with paper. And you definitely shouldn't give him a reason to fight. Saturday morning dawned clear and calm, the kind of Florida morning where the breeze is soft, the sky is endless, and the water lies glassy in its stillness. The perfect backdrop for what Tyler Jenkins had planned. By 8 a.m., residents were already gathering around the community boat launch for the HOA's monthly Harbor Harmony event, an ironically named meet and greet, where board members would sip lemonade under white tents, hand out brochures about compliance, and remind boat owners of their shared responsibilities. But this morning the scene was different. Libby was there, all right, but not as they expected. Tyler had anchored her squarely across the concrete launch ramp, positioned in a way that made it impossible for anyone to drop in or pull out a boat. Heavy-duty chains secured her to a piling, and an industrial padlock gleamed in the sun like a challenge. Strapped across the railings was a massive vinyl banner that read, in bold red letters, "Private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A few people laughed nervously, unsure if it was a joke. But Mike Granger wasn't laughing. The former cop's jaw clenched as he marched toward the dock, clipboard in hand, sunglasses pushed high on his forehead. "You think this is funny?" he barked at Tyler, who stood beside the ramp, arms folded and calm as still water. "No," Tyler replied. "I think it's legal." And it was. Over the past week, Tyler had buried himself in county records, water rights regulations, and municipal code. What he found was simple and powerful. While the HOA governed the neighborhood's land-based amenities, the canal itself, including the launch ramp, was under public jurisdiction. As long as he wasn't blocking emergency access or causing harm, he had every right to anchor where he did. He had filed a temporary anchorage permit with the county. He had written approval from the Waterway Commission. He even had a laminated copy of both, tucked in his pocket, just in case Mike tried anything bold. But Mike didn't move, because he couldn't. To touch Libby now, to try and remove or tamper with her, would be a criminal offense. Suddenly, the man who had controlled the neighborhood through intimidation and fine print was frozen in place, powerless. Within an hour, photos were all over the local Facebook group. Videos hit next door. A drone shot circled the scene and made it into a popular HOA watchdog subreddit. One post read, "HOA tried to bully a guy out of his own boat. He parked it where it hurts, and it's 100% legal." And then the tide shifted. One by one, neighbors began stepping forward, not just online, but in person. A woman from 3 blocks over told Tyler about how Mike had fined her for excess wind chimes. A veteran said he was told to repaint his house because the shade of blue he chose was too expressive. A young couple shared how they were forced to remove their raised vegetable garden after one anonymous complaint. Tyler hadn't just blocked a ramp, he had opened a door, and behind it was a flood of voices long silenced by fear of retribution. The mood at the marina changed. What began as shock transformed into something else: admiration, unity, quiet applause. Tyler didn't raise his voice. He didn't stage a protest. He just dropped anchor. And in that small, deliberate act, he shook the foundation of a system built on silence. The week after Tyler's quiet rebellion, the HOA tried to reassert control. They sent letters, threatened new fines, called emergency board meetings. One flyer even went around claiming Tyler had created an unsafe precedent for community cohesion. But the tone had changed, and this time the community wasn't falling in line. People had seen too much. The photos of Libby blocking the boat ramp had done more than spark outrage. They had cracked the surface of a culture held together by silence and intimidation. For years, residents had swallowed their frustration, afraid of fines or retaliation. Tyler's anchor dropped more than metal. It dropped permission to speak, to push back. Then came the tipping point. A formal complaint was filed with the County Oversight Committee, followed by a public records request that unearthed a long list of questionable fines and procedural violations. A local reporter picked up the story, tying it to broader patterns of HOA abuse across the state. The article went viral. County officials couldn't ignore the public pressure anymore. An official inquiry was launched. What followed over the next 2 months was a slow unraveling. Mike Granger, once untouchable, was suddenly under scrutiny. Financial records were reviewed, his connections to local code enforcement were questioned, and then, quietly, he stepped down. No public statement, no ceremony. Just gone. The board was dissolved and restructured with fresh elections. This time the candidates weren't career complainers or self-appointed enforcers. They were parents, veterans, retirees, people who actually lived on the street and wanted peace, not power. One of their first actions? Revising the bylaws with community input. A new clause was added ensuring that no HOA official could retaliate against residents for raising concerns. And Tyler? He didn't move Libby. The boat remained right where it had floated during the standoff, tied neatly at his dock, flags fluttering, its hull freshly repainted. But something had changed. People started stopping by to ask about dock repairs, welding jobs. Even a few teenagers asked if he could teach them a few tricks with metalwork. So Tyler did what he always knew how to do. He built something, a small business, right from his garage. Anchor Point Marine, he called it. He never advertised. Didn't need to. His neighbors were his best clients, and word traveled fast. People trusted him, not because of his tools, but because he'd shown them what quiet strength looked like. In the end, the fight wasn't about the boat. It was about what the boat stood for. And as for Libby, she still floats in the marina behind Tyler's home. Not as an act of defiance, but as a symbol. Proud, peaceful, untouchable. A reminder to every passerby that when you stand your ground with honesty and grit, even the loudest bullies eventually sink under the weight of their own control. Justice, it turns out, doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it just drops anchor.